Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mike. I'm with the Technically Creative team, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, Understanding New and Emerging Surveillance Technologies, Part 2 in our series on CA, Data Protection, End of Life. Just a few quick housekeeping announcements before we start. You could tweet any questions or comments during and after the webinar using the hashtag TCEOL support. So feel free to do so, and we will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. You can also use the chat box to ask any questions as well. We will leave some time at the end to get your questions. And yes, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send out the recording with the slides after the webinar, so stay tuned for that. One last message to our first-time listeners. Our webinars are formatted to remain client and vendor agnostic. We may discuss incidents, but we intentionally leave out anything that identifies the client or vendor involved. If a question is targeted at a specific incident, we will be sure to follow up with you directly after the webinar. During today's webinar, we will cover the following topics. Our introduction, I will introduce today's subject matter experts. Then we will go over lexicons, policy and rules, analytics, and then followed by a Q&A at the end. And now, once again, it's my pleasure to introduce Danielle and Christopher Amatuli. Danielle is the CEO and Director of Business Operations at Technically Creative and is an Orchestra and CA data protection transition expert. And Christopher is the CTO and Director of Services and Architecture at Technically Creative. He specializes in advanced technical implementations, systems, architecture, and integrations. Under their direction, Technically Creative is recognized as a certified CA Technologies Advanced Tech Partner with over 12 years of experience supporting the Orchestra CA data protection product. Danielle and Christopher, take it away.
Thanks, Mike, and welcome everybody. We're going to start this off with terminology issues we're seeing among the vendors. One of the biggest issues we're facing with the quest for moving to different vendors is that the terminology is getting all mixed up, confused, and in some case, misused by the sales teams. Just as an example, the term lexicon and policy are two totally different technologies. Lexicons are wordless. Typically, if a word matches, then it's a hit. This match-hit type logic usually incorporates regex or some other pattern matching technologies. Policy, on the other hand, works with a scoring mechanism which helps eliminate junk. While it can operate in multiple different types of structures, this common design includes a basic language that incorporates a positive indicator and a negative indicator. Orchestra incorporates 8 different parameters, which do the full range of increment, decrement, match, and discount items that are being processed.
Another issue we've been watching is the difference between discovery and supervision. The base requirements of supervision is to incorporate set rules on what you look for. In a few cases, we've been seeing solutions which utilize a discovery model, with a word list or other type of construct run by the user to look back at the data in the system. The main issue with the discovery model being used for supervision is that evidencing your search is next to impossible and results in gaps due to the late data imports or time-date gaps. A supervision system in any reasonably sized firm must incorporate a fixed rule set that is not editable by a reviewer and not executed at search time.
Lexicons. Let's start this off going into the basic technologies, lexicon base, which include pattern matching technologies like regex. They simply work on the model that if a word or pattern of words matches, then it's a hit.
The good part about systems that provide basic lexicon capabilities is that managing them ends up being the cheapest and easiest of the technologies, which allows for lower maintenance cost.
And top that off, when the regulators say, give me your lexicons, you can without batting an eyelash. The bad part about the technologies is they have the least capabilities in being accurate. Systems that focus on lexicons alone usually burden the reviewers with heavy workloads of events to review, or you end up stripping critical words from the lexicon list because of mass violations.
Well, that's until the next audit where the regulators examine the system and find those words missing. We've been in several audits where words like bribe and party have been removed from the lexicon list due to the hit frequency. only for the real incident to come to light where the event was missed because of the gap.
When going from a fully structured orchestria policy to a lexicon system, expect an uptick in events to review.
And this could be a major burden on your reviewers.
Rules and policies. This is where orchestria sits. Taking the step past lexicons and keeping in mind various systems have different capabilities to provide a policy type construct, a policy tries to wrap a lexicon into context with positive and negative indicators, tying in who said what and in what direction. Ultimately, you end up with a more accurate event to be reviewed, and at a minimum, you filter out the junk.
Products that utilize policy give you the added benefit of having a lexicon list, but balancing out when the lexicon is not a problem. For example, the word party in gifts and entertainment hitting on counterparty can be balanced out by adding in counterparty as a negative indicator.
With that, you also get the ability to add words in context. And while regex used in lexicons can in some cases work to find matches in context, it's still a hit or miss wrapped in a single line. Policy technologies should give you easy ways to say, looking for gifts in any 5 words of you, but not count or negate the count for the Santa gift exchange is all up to you. The negatives are also pretty straightforward. Although these systems can utilize a lexicon to really dive into the power of the system, it requires someone who can break apart the context and when a word is an issue, then using the system syntax to find when a word is a problem, but create lines which can negate when the word is not a problem. For example, when someone's talking about pitching tips for their kid's softball team and someone talking about stock tips to be shared behind the scenes. This typically means not only do you need a person familiar with the regulatory concerns, that person also needs to be able to write the more advanced syntaxes.
We've also seen a lot of cases where policy isn't followed by the examiners. Providing them the actual policy has gotten responses which are evident of them not being able to understand the syntax as well. We do have to admit, though, in the past year, we've seen regulators' skills increasing where they're actually able to read, or at least at a minimum follow the orchestria policy blueprints and come back with accurate responses.
Another one when it comes to policy, it's strongly advised you have a resource which is dedicated to writing, refining, and testing policy. Some vendors have made statements that anyone can manage their policy, which in our world means either the policy isn't policy, it's actually a lexicon, or once you deploy the solution and you try to get into the refinement cycle, you end up adding the resource in order to keep it healthy.
I would strongly recommend anybody examining the systems that go towards policy, make sure you have somebody on your side. Don't rely on the vendor. You should have somebody internal that is your person, familiar with policy, and familiar with what your firm needs to look for. Just as an example, there's a lot of issues with policy that are firm specific, like for example, disclaimers. In an information security label policy, it's very common that you have a disclaimer that says internal use only and the email's going external. What I'd recommend is with that person, you work out the words that are in your disclaimer and add them to your policy as negative indicators to avoid them. In some products, they actually incorporate the entire disclaimer. Some products, they don't necessarily have a solution for it, but it's something to always consider, and it always means you will have a customized version of that policy for your environment.
Now on to the more complex world of analytics, which opens up a broad range of technologies and capabilities based on the product and solution you decide on. There are several categories of analytics. They can be used individually or all together based on how your data relates and the scenarios you can think of.
We will review the following categories on analytics: graphing, trending, behavioral, modeling, and machine learning. And don't let it fool you, they're all intertwined.
Graphing and analytics. This is building relationships between users, data, and even locations.
When it comes to graphing, each technology that's employed, you can make a connection between those data elements. And not to dive in too complex, let's just use email as an example. Employee A emails employee B, who emails employee C. I can count the number of times they email and get an accurate map of their frequency of communications.
Trending in analytics. This is creating a supervision model based on stepping outside the normal activity.
When it comes to trending, trending can be utilized to find somebody's step outside the norm. So, for example, in the graph that we have, employee C, who normally is doing certain volume trades per day, all of a sudden has a sharp uptick. And it could be something that you want to question, because did they exceed their daily volume or something along those lines?
But then we take it a step further to include behavioral changes.
Now here we have employee C, who normally deals in commodity trades. And nothing outside the norm. And then we see a sharp uptick where he bought a large volume of technology shares. This type of deviation from his norm could be something like, for example, he got some information he's not supposed to.
Now let's go even further, creating a model that combines the trend deviations, the behavioral, and graphing to find insider trading activities.
Now, if you reference the previous 3 slides, this is a combination of all 3 to create the full model. Employee A, who deals in technology stocks, was emailing employee B on one of the tech stocks that he was working on. He shared that information with employee C, who's typically a commodities trader. It seems employee C got information from employee B, which they acted on, and now you have a full scenario of insider trading.
Machine learning. This is creating a library trained with the activity you want to catch and the activity that's normal to create a truly advanced supervision model.
Machine learning is one of the cool things in the analytics world. It's actually training a computer to understand what you're looking for. It can be utilized from one end of the spectrum to the other, from identifying data to identifying risk to discounting risk to get rid of junk. There's a lot of functions and features around machine learning that you can utilize it for, but it's still a new technology, and one of the things I can say is if you're going to dive into it, it is powerful. It may be a new technology, but it is useful. I would focus on starting out with baby steps. Take the component from machine learning, use it to get rid of junk. Say, I know this is junk, this isn't related to what I'm surveilling for, and use it to help just get rid of it. And little by little, as your machine learning library improves, gets more robust, and gets more extensive, you can start trusting it to try and find your actual risk.
The positives with these technologies are overwhelming when they work as designed, and they can be extremely accurate, reducing overhead of reviewers drastically by as much as 80%. This actually makes them cost effective in the long run.
Now, when it comes to analytics, also keep in mind, you still have your positive and negative indicators. They still incorporate the lexicons, but now you're going to incorporate them both at the same time. Top that off with, you can get them more accurate than policy, because now you're going to intertwine data. You're going to intertwine the person's time in, time out, their phone calls, their text messages, and intertwine when data came in where, who it went to. Once you start creating these models, you can get far more accurate than you could ever get with a manual policy system or a lexicon. Top that off with the linking the multiple data sources and incorporating who said what to whom when. You get some major accuracy jumps when it comes to finding your actual risk.
The negatives aren't as simple to explain as the other systems. The initial outlay for hardware is higher than the other systems. Management may require data scientists. Some products require extensive services engagements to run and manage the product, and the solutions are all cutting edge, so knowledgeable people are tough to find.
One of the major ones that you're going to run into with the analytics system is explaining it to the regulators. If you wind up trying to explain it to them and their eyes glaze over, it always brings up issues. Whenever you create your model for your surveillance, always make sure you can explain it in detail, how it works, where it works, what it touches, what it relates to. So you can actually just hand a nice big stack of paper to the regulator and say, this is what we're doing for surveillance. Don't rely on trying to explain a machine learning database. Say what you've trained it with. Say what you seeded it with, your lexicons. Start with that type of data. Don't try and say we're using an analytics system with machine learning, because they're not going to deem that sufficient. On top of that, don't let a data scientist scare you. It's another role in an organization. Just like you should have currently, if you have Orchestria, somebody working on your policy, a data scientist is just another person who's going to be working on your policy.
Complexity and cost, the biggest item to balance out in every firm's decision.
I know a lot of people are going to jump at this slide, but hear me out for the explanation. We know by far an analytics system adds major complexity to an environment, which does add costs. With that complexity, though, comes a sharp reduction in what needs to be reviewed, dropping the cost in time for reviewers. In smaller firms, this may not be a huge benefit when you talk about a centralized review team with less than 5 reviewers. But in cases where you have firms with 40+ reviewers, cutting the review efforts from 2 hours a day to 2 hours a week saves costs by reducing the reviewer's workload and, in the long run, dropping the overall cost of the system and your surveillance.
The cost breakdown. To reference a study done on the cost breakdown and ROI for these types of solutions over a 5-year span, typically the resources and the amount of money and time used by the reviewers accounts for about 55% of the total operating costs for a Lexicon-based system. The product itself and licensing is about 20%, and the information technology, the people running it, is about 25%. For policy, the cost percentages are broken up pretty even, with about a third for each reviewers, product, and information technology. As for the analytics, don't let it scare you, but the product accounts for about 60% of the cost. But the reviewers get a nice workload reduction, and your overall costs reflect that, with 15% to the reviewers, and IT support efforts is about 25%.
And don't let the breakdown scare you. This is over 5 years. And the really interesting one, based on everything we've been researching and seeing, the cost winds up being very close across all the different types of systems. From your initial outlay, your IT staff to support it, and the reviewer's workload, they actually equate to about the same amount of money.
We've gone over a lot of information, so in summary, no solution is perfect. It comes down to what is important to you and your firm. When picking your next solution, keep in mind the more basic solutions typically translate to more burden on the reviewers, and the more complex solution results in more support by IT staff.
Also keep in mind, the more complex and feature-rich solutions need technical staff to keep them moving forward.
Also remember, don't fall for out of the box is good enough when it comes to what you surveil for. FINRA demands proactive efforts, so advancing the criteria of your supervision process and content is critical to stay out of the sights of the examiners. This is a major move, and you'll need to put in a lot of efforts into the product you choose to get your supervision process complete, running, and well maintained. And we're here to help ease that migration process any way we can.
In the coming months, we have several events planned, all geared at providing information and helping you in your decision-making process. June 12th, we'll be participating in a vendor webinar. Technically Creative will be appearing as a subject matter expert. Topic, step-by-step strategy for migrating from CA data protection. This will address specifically migrating to this particular archive platform. On June 20th, we will be participating in another vendor webinar. Technically Creative again will be appearing as a data minder subject matter expert. The topic, CA Orchestria End of Life, the 1-year countdown. On June 27th, we will be hosting our third information webinar in our 3-part series geared at providing information for CA data protection end of life customers. The topic, CA data protection end of life, 6 steps to migrating policy compliantly. The policy migration process is proving to be one of the most complex, time-consuming, and critical pieces of the CA data protection migration process. You may have the very best system on the market, but without well-defined and developed policies in place, you leave yourself exposed to a tremendous amount of risk. So we'll be discussing preparing your data, things to take into consideration during your policy construction and deployment phase. whether you're moving to a Lexicon-based system, a new policy system, or an analytics platform. We'll go over the 6 critical steps to migrating your CA data protection policy compliantly into your new surveillance system. Registration for all of these webinars is available on our events page at technicallycreative.com. So lots of information to come. If there are any specific topics that you would like an additional information on, please don't hesitate to reach out. Here is our contact information. In addition, everyone on this webinar is invited to contact me directly at damatuli@technicallycreative.com to set up a free 1-hour migration assessment where we can help answer any of your questions and give you the inside scoop on what we're seeing in the market. So pick our brains and see how we can work together. Send me over an email. Simply place migration assessment in the subject line, and I'll get back to you later today.
Thank you, Christopher and Danielle, for that informative presentation. Now we are going to move to Q&A. If you haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, you can still do so through the chat box or by tweeting at us using the hashtag TCEOL support. We've had a couple questions come in already. Our first question is from Jim, who asks, do you see a prevalence of the technology people are moving to?
I wouldn't say there's a prevalence. I've seen a lot of interest in the analytics world, but as for moving to, it's kind of broad right now. I've seen a lot of technologies being deployed around analytics that are broad in the firm. So they might be doing something around marketing, research around analytics, but it's the same thing across the board with the actual decisions they make.
Yeah, it seems everybody's excited about the analytics platforms. There's a little nervousness, a little hesitation. It's very interesting watching this whole process unfold of a lot of people are still in the RFP and proposal phase. A lot of decisions are still being made.
Okay. Our next question is from Lisa. She asked, is there a default list of policies or lexicons that you can recommend?
I wouldn't say there's a default. It's going to be based on your firm's industry, your market. So, for example, if you're a firm that deals in trading, insider trading is probably going to be a topic you want to cover. Gifts and entertainment and stuff like that would be something that's in your realm. OFAC, for example. There's no set policies. It's just going to be based on what you're working on and what industries you touch.
Yeah, we've been working on an extensive policy catalog for the last several years. I think we're up to it's like 150, 180 policies. It's available online at our website, but it's a great starting point, the policies that we've put together through the years. Also, a lot of the vendors are providing out-of-the-box policies for their particular system. So again, that's a great spot to start, but those definitely need to be refined to be more in tune with your systems and operations and your business line.
All right. Neil asked, you mentioned that analytics also uses lexicons. Can you please explain?
When it comes to analytics systems, one of the things you do, one of the technologies, and I'm going to just focus on one technology for the answer. When you talk about an analytics machine learning library, typically what you would start off with is a lexicon to start the machine learning library's learning method. So you load those words in, scan some data, take a look at the data and say, well, this is wrong, this is right. And then the library learns about what you want to find. So it started off with that baseline lexicon and just steadily advances it based on your input.
Yeah, I think it's a great starting point from the migration point of view. That way you don't have to get so overwhelmed and turn on all those different analytic components. You can start with your baseline lexicons, get comfortable in the system, start to utilize it, and you can enhance it and use the more advanced features as you move forward.
Our next question, is it better to go with hosted or in-house installs?
That's going to come down to your firm as well. When it comes to in-house, I'd say if you have the teams, you have the infrastructure, in-house has its benefits, especially around data portability, data integrations. There are some serious benefits when you have it in-house. When you talk about Cloud environments, there's some benefits there, but the one thing I can tell you for sure is focus on being a partner with whatever vendor it is. If they're just looking to sell you something and you operate it yourself, you don't get real benefits. But if they're providing you data experts, they're providing you guidance and resources, then a cloud environment really does have its benefits.
Or at least a third party that will also help that vendor in the process, that can help you really seek that product in. Also, it's really going to come down to, as Chris was saying, that your priorities during the RFP process. I don't think it's a hosted or not hosted. There's a lot of things that are coming in that decision-making process. When you look at the different vendors, the policy structure, their review queues, their hierarchies, their the different data channels and the formats, whether they have controls, even their roadmap. So as you take into account all those different pieces, you'll have to decide whether hosted or in-house, how important that is to your decision.
We still have time for a few more questions. Reminder, you could use the chat feature or tweet at us at #TCEOL support. Moving on to our next question. Carlos asked, outside the different engines, have you seen any vendors able to do a workflow with analytics?
I put that in the hit or miss category. They do have workflows. Different vendors have different options. But when you talk about the analytics solutions, a lot of them are visual, and they'll give you a risk metric, a kind of a direction saying that this person's a concern around insider trading. But several of them have a difficulty drilling down to the individual event. On the other hand, there's some analytic solutions out there that have gotten very good on mimicking a process where, okay, person A is the issue around this email and giving you the ability to surveil that particular item, but then surrounds it with all the reasons why it put it in for review.
All right. Ron's question is, in your firm, we had to remove the name of the vendor. So in the firm, we have an analytics solution in place. Do you know if they can be used for supervision as well?
That's one you're going to actually have to take up with that vendor. Analytics are not just an end-all be-all. Each product has its capabilities, the scenarios you can build into it, the different integrations. I've seen research products that are analytics based that could potentially be a surveillance product, but unless the vendor is on board with it, then it's just not a good idea to try to use it that way.
Yeah, we can take that one offline and continue that. If you need us to join in on the conversation with the vendor to help clarify and communicate what you're looking for, we can do that as well.
Okay. Last question is from Timothy, who asks, how do you report on the regulators? What is in your analytics system being used for supervision?
That's another tricky one. When you build out your analytics, and I'll use machine learning as another example because it is the hardest one to explain to the regulators. If you look at how you trained it, you have to actually document that out. Say what you started with. Say what you denoted that is not an issue, that you're not looking for. And you have to present that to the regulator. A lot of the times they come in and say, we want your lexicons. Well, when you use machine learning, I may have started with a lexicon, but it's a machine learning database now. There's a whole bunch of, just make sure you documented it levels. And in the situations where we've run into so far, doing the whole documentation of how it was trained is enough to get them to basically go away.
Yeah, and in all respect to the regulator, they have, they're trying to understand all these different systems that are out there, not just the particular system you're in. So the easier you can present it, the more straightforward, the more documentation you have, and just making their job easier. It will be beneficial. And if you need help, we also do that too. You can do reporting. We can help with that.
Well, we've answered all your questions. So at this time, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for part 2 of our webinar series, CA Data Protection End of Life, New and Emerging Surveillance Technologies. We hope you all found it very informative. A recording of this webinar along with the slides will be emailed to you shortly, so be on the lookout for that. Lastly, Technically Creative is being featured as subject matter experts on 2 upcoming vendor webinars. The dates for those are June 12th and June 20th. You can find more details and sign up for those webinars on our website. Also, the 3rd webinar in our Technically Creative webinar series is on June 27th, and we will be speaking to 6 steps to migrating policy compliantly. You can sign up for this webinar on our website, and we will send an email invitation out as well, so be out on the lookout. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Technically Creative is ready to work with you if you need any help with your RFP process or assistance in identifying a solution. We'd be happy to ease the migration process. If you'd like to engage with us or set up your consultation, please contact us at getinfo@technicallycreative.com or contact Danielle directly at damatuli@technicallycreative.com. Be sure to place migration assessment in the subject box of the message to receive your complimentary consultation. Thank you and have a good day.